Hi, everyone. I'm Tanya Rivero. Thank you for joining us. President Trump is now just days away from becoming the third president in U.S. history to be impeached. All signs point to a likely Wednesday vote on the two articles against the president, abuse of power and obstruction of justice. But before that happens, the House Rules Committee will hold a hearing tomorrow to set the parameters for the debate that will take place. This comes after the Judiciary Committee submitted a nearly 700-page report explaining its decision to charge the president. The report states the president, quote, betrayed the nation by abusing his high office. The White House, however, is already looking ahead to a trial in the Senate, where Republicans hold the power. Minority Leader Chuck Schumer sent a letter to Majority Leader Mitch McConnell outlining his requests for a Senate trial. Schumer says Democrats want to see several officials called, including acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney and former National Security Advisor John Bolton. Schumer laid out some of his demands in a news conference earlier.
We believe these witnesses and documents would provide the evidence they're looking for without being dilatory or letting the trial drag on for too long. I haven't seen a single good argument about why these witnesses shouldn't testify or these documents be produced, unless the president has something to hide.
Let's bring in Nancy Cordes and Paula Reid now. Nancy is the CBS News chief congressional correspondent, and Paula is a CBS News White House correspondent. Welcome to both of you. Nancy, what is Senator Schumer's reasoning for wanting these specific witnesses?
Well, because he says these are all witnesses who were involved in or observed at close range the effort to pressure Ukraine into announcing investigations into Mr. Trump's political rival, former Vice President Joe Biden. So he believes that they could add a lot to the body of evidence. And beyond that, these are all individuals who had been subpoenaed to testify the first time around before the House impeachment inquiry, but did not come in to testify. So he believes that it would be harder for those individuals and the White House to stonewall the Republican-led Senate than it was for them to ignore the House impeachment inquiry, which had always been derided by White House lawyers as a sham.
But is it likely for Senate Republicans to allow Senate Democrats to have any witnesses at all?
Well, you know, the interesting thing is that it's a different process in the Senate than it was in the House. In the House, the rules give the majority party a great deal of power. They really don't have to listen to the minority party. If the majority doesn't want to hear from a particular witness, they don't have to. In the Senate, it works a little differently. You need to get 51 votes to cut off the trial, to prevent any witnesses. So if even one or two Republicans, it would probably take a little more than that, maybe three or four, if three or four of them felt that they wanted a more robust trial, that they wanted to hear from at least some witnesses, have a full airing of the evidence, then they would be able to join with Democrats to make that happen. So the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell needs to negotiate with his minority counterpart in a way that Democrats didn't have to do in the House.
All right, and Nancy, Senator Schumer also outlined some parameters for what he'd like to see in a Senate trial. What are some of those?
Well, he says that when witnesses do come forward to testify, that they should be interviewed for questioned for no more than 4 hours by both the House impeachment managers and by White House counsel. He says that the trial should basically get underway as soon as the Senate comes back from its recess. And he says that documents should be subpoenaed from the White House, the State Department, the Defense Department. Once again, these are agencies that did not turn over any documentation that the House requested of them. He says the Senate should now try to get materials that the House was unsuccessful at obtaining.
And so, Paula, how does the White House feel about some of these requests of Schumer's, specifically the request to have officials like Mulvaney and Bolton testify?
Well, the White House has tried to spin this by arguing that if Senator Schumer thinks they need more witnesses, that must be because the evidence is not sufficient. But of course, we know, as Nancy just noted, the reason that we haven't heard from many of these White House officials is because the White House has not allowed them to testify. Now, when it comes to former National Security Advisor John Bolton, his attorney has gone to court to seek some guidance on what his clients should do if you are compelled to testify in a congressional proceeding, but the White House tries to block you. That is likely a question, Tanya, that will resolve itself at the Supreme Court, and that could take months before there's a final answer on that. But when it comes to Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, he says it doesn't matter what happens in that Bolton litigation. He says that if this privilege extends to anyone beyond the president, it's him. And he is not going to cooperate with any subpoena or attempt to compel him to testify, and he will only cooperate in the Senate trial or any other congressional proceedings if he is ordered to do so by the White House or GOP leadership.
And Paula, will the White House then continue to coordinate with top Senate Republicans, do you think, despite objection from Democrats?
Well, I know they will. Sources have confirmed to me that this week, the president's top lawyer and top legislative aide will continue to meet with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to talk about this trial strategy. As Nancy noted, the rules in the Senate are different. And right now, Mitch McConnell and these White House officials, they're trying to balance competing interests. The Majority Leader, he's made it clear. He thinks when it comes to the president's defense, less is more. He wants to get this over with swiftly. But the president has said he wants a show. He wants to call witnesses, different witnesses than the one Senator Schumer wants. The president has suggested subpoenaing the Bidens, even the whistleblower. Now, the White House counsel's office has supported so far the president's vision, but there is a hope that perhaps they can make some kind of accommodation similar to what happened in the Clinton impeachment trial, where instead of calling witnesses on the Senate floor, they can maybe handle this some other way. They hope that once the president sees how the process works in the Senate, that he will be confident that he is getting a fair shake, that his case has been heard, and the hope is that they can convince him not to continue to push for these witnesses, because that really does open the door to a lot of issues, especially when the Republican leadership would really like to just move on.
Yes, especially Senator Lindsey Graham, who once again is being vocal about his wish for a speedy trial. Over the weekend, he once again predicted the Senate trial would run its course very quickly. He also said, quote, "I am trying to give a pretty clear signal. I have made up my mind. I'm not trying to pretend to be a fair juror here." So, Nancy, how is that remark being received by Democrats?
Well, I mean, I think that he's probably being pretty honest, right? At this point, all 100 senators have had a chance to see a lot of the evidence. They saw the House impeachment inquiry play out. The likelihood that any of them have not made up their minds at this point about the president's relative guilt or innocence in this impeachment matter is pretty slim. And so I think Lindsey Graham is just saying the quiet part out loud when he says, "I'm already convinced, I'm ready to vote." However, it is in the Constitution, and there are a number of Democrats and perhaps a handful of Republicans who believe that their duty is still to carry out a fair trial and a full airing of the evidence. And so while you're going to hear from a variety of Democrats, in fact, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer just said this morning that his mind is not made up, that he's going to be a fair juror. I think the likelihood that he would vote against impeaching President Trump or against removing him at the end of the day is probably pretty slim. He's going to stick with House Democrats on this one.
All right, and Paula, back to one of our favorite topics. Rudy Giuliani sent a series of tweets over the weekend alleging that he has evidence of corruption in Ukraine related to the Bidens. Senator Lindsey Graham did invite him to talk to the Judiciary Committee, but not as part of the impeachment process. So I'm curious, does the White House now see Giuliani as a help or a hindrance? Where does he fall at this point?
Well, Tanya, it depends what you mean by the White House. There's the president, and then there's his staff. When it comes to the president, he met with Rudy Giuliani for nearly 2 hours on Friday. He is still a part of the president's personal legal team, despite the fact that not only is he at the center of the events that have led to impeachment, he's also under investigation by the Trump Justice Department. But the president has said repeatedly he believes that Rudy Giuliani brings gravitas to his defense. And the fact that he spent all this time speaking with him on Friday, that is significant. But if you talk to other White House officials involved in his impeachment defense, they are not quite as enthusiastic about Giuliani's participation. They're very quick to note that Giuliani is a private citizen and that he is not involved in any of the formal machinations of impeachment. But as long as the president believes that he is a valuable member of the team, it is likely that he is here to stay. And in fact, Giuliani told me on Friday that while he has not been asked, that he would be willing to participate in a Senate trial, depending on what that looks like. But it is unlikely he will get that invitation.
Very interesting. All right, turning back really quickly to the House side of things, as we're still in the House, not yet at the Senate. Over the weekend, Democratic New Jersey Congressman Jeff Van Drew signaled that he would be switching his party affiliation to Republican over impeachment. Now, we know he represents a district the president won in 2016. But Nancy, how are other Democrats in similarly pro-Trump districts handling this vote?
Well, for each Democrat, it's different. They are weighing the pros and cons of announcing now that they are going to be voting in favor of impeaching the president. Some of them may decide not to vote in favor of impeaching the president. And for all of them, however, it appears that they are trying to show that they're being measured about this, that they're really thinking carefully, that it's a very difficult decision for them. They realize that obviously it is going to drive a wedge between them and some of the independent and Republican voters who they need to win in districts that went for President Trump in 2016. But at this point, it appears that many of them are making a political calculation that these are voters who are going to be frustrated with Democrats and lump them in with those Democrats at the end of the day anyway. And they would argue they're making a philosophical or moral decision as well once they have had a chance to consider all of the evidence. And so we've seen over the past few days a number of those moderate Democrats announce that they are, in fact, going to be, after a lot of soul searching, voting to impeach the president.
And I believe Congresswoman Slotkin from Michigan just came out publicly, and it was an interesting reaction from her constituents. I think we have that sound. Let's play it.
Whether you agree with me or not, that I have attempted in all that I can to be transparent, to be communicative, to let you know what I was doing. And for me, this was an issue of principle. This was an issue in my bones of principle. So I will be voting yes on obstruction of Congress.
Very interesting reaction there. There's boos and cheers in the room, pretty much equal measure to my ear, but it's tricky. It's a tricky calculation.
It is a tricky calculation, and kudos to her for soldiering through about an hour's worth of very emphatic, both rejection of her position and support for her position at that town hall this morning in Michigan. Mm-hmm. She was speaking and she was being booed the entire time, cheered by others, by a number of constituents at other times, and the protesters who had come to show their feelings really did not let up during almost her entire remarks. She talked about other issues beyond impeachment, but she was clearly well aware that she was going to get an earful at this town hall. She came prepared to talk about her rationale, why she had finally come to this decision. She issued an op-ed separately in the local paper this morning, and she stayed on that stage, even though at times you couldn't even hear what she was saying because she was being drowned out by the crowd.
She made her decision and she's sticking to it. All right, Nancy Cordes and Paula Reid in Washington, thanks to both of you.
You're welcome.